So, just take a moment to be here. Just feeling your feet on the ground. Feeling that that sense of the golden bowl of your pelvis firmly resting on the seat. That understanding that wherever you find yourself, you have the earth beneath you, not just the carpet. And you have the sky above you, not just the ceiling of your room. You have a real sky. And here you are. Here is all of you. Here is all of me. Just as I am. And so I want to start today's session by reading from a book, a story for you. Story time, everybody. It's called How Can I Help by Ram Dass, one of my teachers, and Paul Gorman. Emotional support and spiritual inspiration for those who care for others. And this is from a section called The Listening Mind. On the bulletin board in the front hall of the hospital where I work, there appeared an announcement. Yeshe Dondon, it read, will make rounds at 6 o'clock on the morning of June 10th. The particulars were then given, followed by a notation. Yeshe Dondon is the personal physician to the Dalai Lama. I am not so leathery a skeptic that I would knowingly ignore an emissary from the gods. Thus, on the morning of June 10, I joined the clutch of white coats waiting in the small conference room, adjacent to the ward selected for the rounds. The air in the room is heavy with ill-conceived dubiety and suspicion of bamboozlement. At precisely 6 o'clock, he materializes. A short, golden, barrelly man dressed in a sleeveless robe of saffron and maroon. His scalp is shaven, and the only visible hair is a scanty black line above each hooded eye. He bows in greeting while his young interpreter makes the introduction. Yeshe Dondon, we are told, will examine the patient selected by a member of the staff. The diagnosis is unknown to Yeshe Dondon as it is to us. The examination of the patient will take place in our presence, after which we will reconvene in the conference room, where Yeshe Dondon will discuss the case. We are further informed that for the past 2 hours, Yeshe Dondon has purified himself by bathing, fasting, and prayer. I, having breakfasted well, performed the most desultory of ablutions, and given no thought at all to my soul, glance furtively at my fellows. Suddenly we seem a soiled, uncouth lot. The patient had been awakened early and told that she was to be examined by a foreign doctor, and had been asked to produce a fresh specimen of urine. So when we enter her room, the woman shows no surprise. She has long ago taken on that mixture of compliance and resignation that is the face of chronic illness. This was but to be another in an endless series of tests and examinations. Yeshe Dondan steps to the bedside while the rest stand apart, watching. For a long time he gazes at the woman, favoring no part of her body, but seeming to fix his glance at a place just above her supine form. I too study her. No physical sign or obvious symptoms gives a clue to the nature of her disease. At last he takes her hand, raising it in both of his own. Now he bends over the bed in a kind of crouching stance, his head drawn down into the collar of his robe. His eyes are closed as he feels for her pulse. In a moment he has found the spot, and for the next half hour he remains thus, suspended above the patient like some exotic golden bird with folded wings, holding the pulse of the woman beneath his fingers, cradling her hand in his. All the power of the man seems to have been drawn down into this one purpose. It is palpation of the pulse raised to a state of ritual. From the foot of the bed where I stand, it is as though he and the patient had entered a special place of isolation, of apartness, about which a vacancy hovers and across which no violation is possible. After a moment, the woman rests back on her pillow. From time to time, she raises her head to look at the strange figure above her, then sinks back once more. I cannot see their hands joined in a correspondence that is exclusive, intimate, his fingers receiving the voice of her sick body through the rhythm and the throb at her wrist. All at once, I'm envious, not of him, not of Yeshe Dondan for his gift, of beauty and holiness, but of her. I want to be held like that, touched so, received. And I know that I, who have palpated 100,000 pulses, have not felt a single one. At last, Yeshe Dondan straightens, gently places the woman's hand upon the bed and steps back. The interpreter produces a small wooden bowl and 2 sticks. Yeshe Dondan pours a portion of the urine specimen into the bowl and proceeds to whip the liquid with 2 sticks. This he does for several minutes until a foam is raised. Then, bowing above the bowl, he inhales the odor 3 times. He sets the bowl down and turns to leave. All this while he has not uttered a single word. As he nears the door, the woman raises her head and calls out to him in a voice at once urgent and supreme. "Thank you, doctor," she says, and touches with her other hand the place he held on her wrist, as though to recapture that something that had visited there. Yeshe Dondan turns back for a moment to gaze at her and then steps into the corridor. Rounds are at an end. We are seated once more in the conference room. Yeshe Dondan speaks now for the first time in soft Tibetan sounds that I'd never heard before. He had barely begun when the young interpreter begins to translate, the 2 voices continuing in tandem, a bilingual fugue, the one chasing the other, the other. It is like the chanting of monks. He speaks of winds coursing through the body of the woman, currents that break against barriers, eddying. These vortices are in her blood, he says, the last spending of an imperfect heart. Between the chambers of the heart, long, long before she was born, a wind had come and blown open a deep gate that must never be opened. Through it charged the full waters of her river as the mountain stream cascades in the springtime, battering, knocking loose the land and flooding her breath. Thus he speaks, and now he is silent. May we have the diagnosis, a professor asks. The hosts of these round, the man who knows answers, congenital heart disease, interventricular septal defect with resultant heart failure. A gateway in the heart, I think, that must not be opened. So, here then is the doctor, listening to the sounds of the body to which the rest of us are deaf. He is more than doctor, he is priest. There's something deeply moving about that. And the juxtaposition of the kind of scientific mind, interventricular, blah, 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 and I who have pulsated 100,000 pulses and not felt one. That mind, which is not a bad mind at all. It's a particular kind of mind. And comparing that with a different mind, a different approach, a different heart. And I read recently somewhere that Thich Nhat Hanh was asked, what would he do if he met bin Laden? So you can tell it's a little while ago. And Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Vietnamese Buddhist monk, a peace activist, said, I would listen very carefully. And then, then we have, the Western approach. And I remember at the time having a dream just before 9/11, the night of 9/11 actually, before the night before the 9/11, and in the dream, I was I was in the front of a plane, flying into a building. And as I come out the other side in the dream, somehow I come out the other side in the dream, and I'm holding a bloody heart. And I just wonder if we had listened to the bloody heart, if we'd listened to that pulse, there would be a different outcome. But it is what it is. And everybody has to do what they have to do. But so, when I was reflecting this morning on what we're doing here, on one level, I'm talking about the principles, these life qualities that are part of our true nature. But the other thing that I'm doing is I'm trying to give you, which is what I'm doing in these. This is the second part of this series. Is I'm trying to give you a feel for the dynamic of the principles. So the feel, the dynamic of the first principle is in that golden bowl, as it were. It's in the touch. It's in the sensation. I'm wanting to give you the sensation of it below your neck. Because once you understand, what I like to say is that if I tell you to find fire in a room, but I don't tell you what fire is, you could burn your hand in the fire and still not know you'd found it. But if I tell you what fire is, if I show you what fire is, if I let you experience what fire is, I could send a blind man or woman into a room where there is a fire and say, find the fire. They can't see the fire, but find the fire. And by that feeling, of heat, they would be able to track, where the fire is. And, that's what we want to do here. It's no good understanding it, here. If it was just about reading something, or if it was just about listening to somebody say something, we'd all be enlightened by now. So that's not it. And if it was in a practice, we'd all be enlightened by now. But that's not it. A practice is just that. It's just a practice. It's what you do the rest of the time. That's the key element, the important part. The practice is literally that. It's practice. It's practice for what? The real thing. What's the real thing? Life. And what do you do in life? Well, you can't do return to sender on a bus. Well, you could, and people do actually. But here am I. It's not appropriate. But what you can do is start to and remembering a principle, is good. I mean, that's great, but it doesn't work that often. But if you have the feeling of the principle, if you have the feeling of that bowl, as you realize you're losing your center with somebody or something, you can, just simply with your attention, you can come back and you can feel your tail. You can feel that bowl. You can feel it resonate. You can feel it sitting on the earth, and that starts to a cascade of kind of return, if you like. And if you just give it a little while, you're back. So I'm trying to give you a feel for, the dynamic of the principles. And the principles, are represented essentially in three areas of the body. The first area is what we were doing last week. And the second area is kind of like here. And the third area is here. And it's kind of based around, in a way, the meditation of the three powers, which we did in week 4, I think it was. So today, what I want to, the meditation today is around the second principle of flow, of relaxation, of kind of openness, you might say. And what I want to talk about, is this, which is where the story comes in, is the difference between the mind that isn't the principle and the mind that is the principle. It's what I call kind of foreground mind and background mind. And what I've said before is that if I was an alien and I came down here and was looking at human beings to see what was helpful in times of trouble, I would be forced to conclude that this must help, or this must help, because that's what we do. And what is, and as a martial artist, what you understand very quickly is that is not helpful. That actually creates a barrier between reality. And if you want to move with reality, you can't afford to have that barrier there. So from the martial art point of view, the first thing that a martial artist does, which is different from everybody else is turning away. Everyone else is kind of running. A martial artist does the exact opposite. The first thing a martial artist does is turn towards it. And then it gets even worse because then what a martial artist does is become undefended. And what we want to do is run away, or if we're not running away, what we want to do is defend ourselves. We want to put a barrier there. But the martial artist, the spiritual martial artist, understands that yes, maybe that might be necessary at certain points of our journey, but there's a point in our journey when that is not helpful. And so what we need to do is, because we are present, we then need to kind of unfurl ourselves before it. It's what I call the unwrinkled mind. That sometimes you see that picture of the brain, and if you look at the picture of the brain, it looks like it's been in water too long. It's all got these wrinkles all over it. And our thinking mind is like that. That in another way I have of thinking about it is, if you look around your room, every object you see, you have a name for it. Just take a look. You know the name for absolutely everything. And you know the function of most of those things, if not all of those things. You kind of understand what's behind it. But if you bring a horse in here, probably wouldn't even see this. It would be completely meaningless. It wouldn't have a name. And even if it saw it, it wouldn't have a name for it. If you bring a baby in here, what does a baby do? It hasn't yet tightened its mind up to kind of learn things. So it just sees things as they are. And you might say that Yeshadondan there is unfurling himself, before the woman's condition, listening deeply, letting her in one way enter him and he enters her. There's that intimacy. It's not a barrier. There is no barrier there. He receives the woman. She gets what's happening and relaxes back. And is touched. And that is healing. But it's also going to receive a different wisdom. It's going to get different information. Or it's going to get the same information, but with many different layers to it. That's a whole, sure, there's a cultural thing there, but that's a whole, the feel for the humanity, that listening heart. The result, which is that empathetic, that intimate relationship, comes from it comes from the first principle, because he's deeply present. But it's the second one that I'm looking at, that he's opening himself. Like the martial artist, he's opening himself in order to really understand what is happening in relationship. So it's we have a while ago, well, quite a long while ago, perhaps 40 years ago, somewhere around there, I was sitting in meditation, and more by luck than anything else, there started, I was probably considering, I probably had understood the first principle, and I was probably, considering the second principle. It might have been somewhere around there. And something started to happen in my mind, my brain. I started to first of all, I started to contemplate, where does this come from? Where does my speech come from? And because I was on retreat, I wasn't speaking, but I had a lot of voices in my head. And what I saw is that if I wasn't on retreat, I'd be, and I had someone in front of me, I'd be talking to them about whatever this was. But here I am in retreat, I'm not talking, but still there's that voice going on in my mind. And that sort of conversation, I've actually invented someone to talk to, just to distract myself. And, as you do. And so I started thinking, well, where does this internal voice, which isn't sounded, if you were to watch me, it'd look like I was kind of Buddha or something, but you know how it is internally, it's a whole other ball game. And so there's a lot of noise. And it was like a voice. It was a voice. I was listening to a voice, except you couldn't hear it. And so I started to observe, well, where does that come from? I'm going to track it back. Where does that voice come from? What am I talking about? How do I know what I'm talking about? Where is that? And I kind of went back, behind the internal voice to the kind of knowing of what it was wanting to say or looking at. And again, because I was on retreat and had nothing else to do, I then decided, well, to look behind that. Where does that come from? And there were a few more stages, but it doesn't really matter how many stages. But where does that knowing come from? And I kind of got to this place of, let's say, mystery, where all of that arises from. It's the back of the mind, you could say. It's not really the mind, it's more like awareness. But there is this very quiet place where all of this comes from. But what we only listen to, as it were, is this part and just that next layer in. And when we look at something, we use that just to see and name. So, if you're looking at me now, so another way you could think about it is like with the eyes. So, if you're looking, well, I assume you're looking at me, but if you're not, look at me. And, you have an idea of who this is. And you can pick up something from the color, you can pick up something from my haircut, you can pick up something from whatever I'm adorned with, my watch, or, you can pick up from my features, you can pick up from, there's all kinds of things you're picking up about me. And you are making judgments about it, and you're positioning yourself in relationship to me. You've named me, this is who I am, this is how it is, there he is. True-ish. Now shut your eyes. Keep them shut. What do you know about me right now? You don't even know if I'm a man or a woman if I don't speak. You don't know how old I am. You don't know anything about me. So now open your eyes. Now, if you look at me again in the old way, then you're just going to see the confirmation of what you saw before. But now just settle back. This may or may not work. Just sort of settle back. Just settle back into the mystery. And let me come. So instead of you looking at me, and you can still see me like you saw me before, but you might start to feel something shifting, something changing. It's the difference between taking a pulse and listening. So there's this background. It's like learning to see from the back of your eyes. So again, in my Tai Chi training, I'm sure I must have said this before, it was 2 years when I was doing the sort of martial element of it, beginning the martial element of it. This is the Jua work. 2 years, my teacher didn't let me use my eyes. Because he wanted me to listen in that other way, or at least start. And I'm still learning to do that. I mean, this is work in progress. I'm not a master of all of this. I'm a student of all of this. Still work in progress, 40 years on. And a way of just accessing it is be aware when you're in the foreground, when you're looking at things. You're kind of there, and it's all like this. That dynamic will never get the principles. But just let yourself settle back in your eyes. Just let yourself settle back in your mind, back into your body. And that's very different. Everything's the same and everything's different. You get a different take on it. You get a different feel. You get what you got with the foreground mind, but you get all this other listening. So you could think about it through your eyes. You could think about it. We're going to do a meditation on this sort of area here, and I use touch, which is kind of radical in the sort of I think it is anyway. To me, I don't see many meditators using touch, but touch is, I found, maybe because my background was with movement. I found touch I needed touch. I needed it physical. It's no good telling me about relaxation. I needed touch to show me relaxation. So we're going to use a meditation again around touch. We did that last week on the belly, and so this week we're going to do it on the face and the head, and we're going to use touch to access what I call unwrinkling the mind, which is essentially the second principle. It's the essence of the second principle. In this center of the second principle, which is your mind, and it is also in the body too. I mean, in different areas. It's not just in the mind, but this is one of the main causes of the problem of cutting us off from the second principle. Because, and it's partly to do with our education, and it's partly how we're taught to learn, and how we're taught to see, and how we're taught to talk, and how we're taught to think and analyze. And it's how we kind of get through life. But that isn't living. And there's a whole lot more. The mind of meditation. The difference between contemplation and thinking is that thought is held in this openness, in this embodied openness. When thought is held in the embodied openness, the meditation is on thought, is in the thinking, it's listening to your thinking. And actually what you realize is all that thought does is just give you options. It doesn't actually know anything at all. Just like you know nothing about me with your eyes. Thought knows nothing. It can't tell you if it's right or wrong. What tells you if it's right or wrong is when you allow the truth to hit you. That's the aha moment. It's like, okay. So all the mind is doing is just giving you options. The one that hears that option is the true one for you. That is this open mind. The listening mind, you could say. The unwrinkled mind. The unwrinkled mind can spot the truth a mile away. The tight mind can't see anything other than the name of something. And I think in the classes, Marigold and Andrea have talked about, when we really allow ourselves to see something, that's when we're touched, and through the sunset, or through your grandchildren, or someone you love, But when you're in that relationship, historical relationship with that person, when I'm just naming that person in the historical role, I don't actually see that person. They're just that. They're that role that I put them in. And it's a historical role. I never actually really see them behind it. And so this ability to or quality to let go of the history, because that's holding the history, and enter this fluid moment. That's what we want. That's where we want to allow ourselves to be. And just finally, there's a whole kind of language about, someone says, well, just let go of it. Well, you can't let go of things. Let go is the last thing that happens. But long before the let go, there's this receiving of something, and the softening around it, and then the opening to it. And then it might leave, because I have let go. And so what a lot of people talk about, what they really mean by let go is throw away. But if you take a look at your life, throw away doesn't work. Because that kind of throwaway is like it's like my glasses on an elastic band, a very long elastic band. I'm going to throw, and it's not long. It's like, or they're like a boomerang, it's not long before they come back. And here we are again, woof, tunk, here we are again, and poof, here we are again. Whereas, that is let go. No, it doesn't matter. And it's not let go as such. It's just an opening, an allowing of something to be. It's taking that foreground mind off so that you can simply see it as it is. Okay, so a slightly longer talk today. Sorry about that, but the story was is an important aspect to that. It kind of just does something dynamically. So we're going to move into a meditation in a moment, and so if you need to just move a little bit or take a drink or whatever you want to do, I'm just going to take a drink myself. Oh, and there is an element of too of of these talks. This whole process actually does come out of that place. It arises. So I'm kind of talking to you, but I'm listening back there. And sometimes I can talk about it as it's like I've got a fingertip, on the mystery. Got a fingertip on that background mind. As I'm engaged in the foreground mind, I have a fingertip on that background mind, and then so together, that's a very efficient place to do this from. Because it's both acting, but the acting is coming out of listening. And even if I have a framework of what I want to say, I'm not kind of holding on to that. It's just arising. And sometimes I think you can feel that when that happens.